Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our second webinar in our series on the DEC recommended practices for engaging families. Today's topic is on resources and materials that support family use of the recommended practices. My name is Betsy Ayonkoya with the Early Childhood TA Center, and I'm happy to say welcome and introduce our ECTA team of presenters, Evelyn Shaw, Allison Jones, and Stephanie Ma, who also Region B ECTA Center. Welcome. Since many of you may not have been able to be with us from the first webinar, we do want to take this opportunity to kind of give a recap from webinar 1. We shared information about the Division for Early Childhood DEC, about that professional organization that is the professional organization for early childhood special educators. DEC provides guidance on early intervention and early childhood special education practices related to better outcomes for young children with disabilities and their families, and for the personnel who serve them. We also shared information about the DEC recommended practices. It currently consists of 66 practices in 8 topical areas that you see here on your screen. All of the areas and the parentheses and the numbers indicate the number of practices in each topic area. So you see that the practices range in 14 practices for leadership and down to 2 practices in transition, which has the least amount. Now, we refer to the latest version of the DEC recommended practices, which was released in 2014. Those set of practices were compiled and validated through the volunteer efforts of DEC members, and it represents the highest standards of practice for the field. Today, what we're going to do is spend some time sharing information with you about the suite of resources that have been developed by the Early Childhood TA Center that support the use of the use of the practices, particularly related to families. And we're going to be sharing with you how to access and use resources to support families that you work with. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Evelyn Shaw, who's going to introduce you to our suite of practice tools. Evelyn.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to give you a little bit of background. When the 2014 version of the DEC recommended practices was published, the Early Childhood TA Center was charged with developing resources to promote the use of the recommended practices. And these practice improvement tools guide practitioners and families in supporting young children who have or are at risk for developmental delays or disabilities across a variety of settings. The practice improvement tools include performance checklists, practice guides for practitioners, and practice guides for families. The first of the tools are the performance checklists. One of the things we recognized is that in order for practitioners to best support families in using evidence-based practices, the practitioners themselves must be supported in using evidence-based practices that best support and engage families. Therefore, ECTA has developed tools and resources that support a practitioner's implementation of the recommended practices. The performance checklists are intended, again, for practitioners and leaders, where noted, to increase their understanding and use of those DEC recommended practices, and for self-evaluation of one's own use of the practices. If you will recall from webinar 1, DEC refers to a practitioner as those who are responsible for and paid to enhance the optimal development of young children who have or are at risk for developmental disabilities delays. This includes providing care, education, or therapy to the child, as well as support to the child's family. The next tool is the practice guides for practitioners, which offer more information about the indicators of the performance checklist by describing the practice and providing examples of what it looks like through the use of videos and vignettes. And a little bit later on, we're going to look at every performance checklist and practice guides in more detail. Finally, the practice guides for families offer information about the practices and support a family in using them to support or advocate for their own child. You will also see that there is information about the aRPy Ambassador Program. This program is aimed to increase awareness and use of the DEC recommended practices and the resources and tools developed by DEC and ECTA to support implementation of those practices. Webinar 4 will provide an introduction to the aRPy Family Ambassador Program, which is a new initiative. Just wanted to point out that the practice guides for families have all been translated into Spanish. And so we're very pleased about that. Now next, this is the same page, and I just wanted to let you know that if we have time at the end of this webinar, we'll try to go live to the ECTA website and do a tour that way. But for now, let's look at some of the additional resources and navigation on the left side of the screen in the green box. You'll see that there are practice improvement tools using the DEC recommended practices, which includes about these practices, about these products. There's a master product list, which gives you a chance to find out for every recommended practice what products go with that particular practice. There's also the DEC online edition of the recommended practices and information about international recognition that we've received. There are recommended practice tools by type. So here's another way that you can get to the performance checklist, the practice guides for practitioners, the practice guides for families in English and in Spanish. And there's also a selection tool for performance checklist and practice guides. And this is designed more for a practitioner who's trying to narrow down their search of a specific checklist and a practice guide. We also have all the tools listed by topic based on the DEC recommended practices. Finally, there's a section that provides resources and tools on providing professional development. And I won't go into that today, but you can certainly take a look at these on your own. Now that you have some orientation to the web space, we're going to focus the remainder of our time on introducing you to the three of the resources: performance checklists, practice guides for practitioners, practice guides for families. So here are the performance checklists. As you can see, they're organized again by the recommended practice topic areas. On this slide, this is an example of a performance checklist. So you can see at the top of the checklist that this is one of 3 checklists that support the topic of teaming. Excuse me, I thought I had some arrows, but I do not. Once you begin reviewing the checklist on your own, you will notice a few things. So all checklists are formatted the same way for consistency across topic areas. All are one page for usability and acceptance by practitioners as easy and quick. And this is because they were field tested for social validity, for that acceptance and usability by practitioners. Now this is the top of the checklist, which is the checklist instructions. So I'm zeroing in on the introduction section of the checklist, because in this you get this brief introduction on the top of every checklist that provides you a description of the practice and the intended use of the checklist. As a reminder, the purpose of these checklists is to support a practitioner in using the recommended practices. Therefore, a practitioner may use this checklist as self-evaluation or self-reflection to identify the characteristics of the practice that are personal strengths, as well as the characteristics that may be challenging to implement. These can also be used to guide coaching. The checklists are not intended to be used by a supervisor as an annual performance evaluation. Excuse me. Finally, let's look at the actual checklist items or indicators. Allison, I might have you take over for me, okay?
Okay. So at the top of the list, the performance checklist, you can see that these are numbered, and there's only about 10 to 12 per checklist for the ease of use. We know if we put too many indicators, people find it a little bit more difficult to implement. There is a scoring section on the top, seldom or never, some of the time, as often as I can, and most of the time. And this is really more for a practitioner to really self-evaluate. It's also going to support coaching sessions if you have a coach that's supporting a practitioner in using these practices. And then there's another section title with the notes. And this is where a practitioner can, provide some evidence of their use of these practices, again, to support their own self-evaluation, but also to support coaching. But again, as we said, this would be helpful for a parent-centered professional to use the checklist to reflect on how they're informing families of their rights and roles and what to expect as a partner on their child's education team. A parent-centered professional may also use a checklist to help families know what they can or should expect, what they might ask for, and what the recommended practices say about the focus area or practice. And then lastly, there's a piece at the bottom that we wanted to point out that just shows you that the checklist is based on the following DEC recommended practices, so that you can see where all of these things connect. So this wasn't a checklist with indicators that we just kind of thought were good ideas, but they are rooted in those recommended practices, so you can see how they correspond.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate you pitching in, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I just wanted to remind you that if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box tab located either at the bottom or the top of your screen, or use the chat box. So Allison, I believe you're next. See if I can move it forward.
Thanks. Thanks, Evelyn. So I have made notes so that I don't forget important things, because I just think these resources are really great and exciting. So as Evelyn mentioned, there are the performance checklists, and then the practice guides were written for practitioners specifically in mind, and then we have practice guides written specifically for the audience of families in understanding how to use the practices to support their child. Again, some of the practitioners, when we think about practitioners, we think of administrators, teachers, therapists, professional development providers, obviously parent center staff, and a lot more. It's kind of hard to list everyone when we think of practitioners. The practice guides are also written for families. And these are written, they're all organized by the DEC topic area, just like the practice, their performance checklists. So that's nice to have that consistency and that organization. And I wanted to point out that a lot of times practitioners may read through a practice guide for themselves to self-evaluate and ensure that they are addressing all of the key characteristics of a practice before they then look at a practice guide to support families. And then the practice guides for families, as we'll see, really are written using family-friendly language. So here is an example of a practice guide for practitioners. And I wanted to point out, and we're going to go into more detail on this in webinar 3, but I did want to go ahead and make this connection for you that the practice guides are basically deeper descriptions of those checklists. So, so they follow those same indicators, and I'll point that out. So all of the practice guides are formatted the same way, intentionally using strategies known to support adult learners. So you can see, for example, with this first arrow, it talks about the description of the practice. So it's pointing to this blue box, which is at the top of the practice guide, and it's giving you an introduction. It's telling you what is the practice and what's the intended benefit. It seems so simple, but a lot of times we leave out some of these key pieces or these key ingredients. And so it's really important to see from the beginning what are the intended benefits? What's in it for me? What's in it for my child? What's in it for me as a practitioner? What's in it for me as a family member? So that's just a big key that we like to point out. The other section of the practice guide is showing you how to perform the practice, how to do it. So it answers that question of how do I actually do this practice? Because so many times we've been in the field for a long time and we've kind of gotten it down, but sometimes we need to help explain it to families in a meaningful way. And it's nice to see the key characteristics as a practitioner as well, to see where we might, some areas we might want to improve on ourselves. Another piece of each practice guide includes this little box, which says watch a video of the guide. So this is a video illustration or it might be a photo montage that really just gives an example of what this looks like, because many of us learn by seeing it being done. So this gives a little bit of a model for practitioners to see how it's being done and how it's being used, as well as families. So we've gotten a lot of positive response by including this video section. And then you'll see this large section is just another illustration of the practice being used in an everyday context for practitioners as well as families. And then lastly, this is one, even though it's a small piece on the practice guide, you see it visually, it would be easy to kind of skip over it. But it's so, so important. We call this section, you'll know the practice is working if. Again, it gives you indicators or outcomes to know that you've been successful in using this practice. Again, it's something that a lot of times we overlook, but it's so key. It's those family and child outcomes that we want to see happening through the use of the practice. And I wanted to point out, I put this on the slide just so I wouldn't forget to point it out, that we do have mobile access for the practice guides. We recognize that people are accessing resources in a variety of ways. So we we're able to put these into mobile formats as well. So when you pull them up, they may look a little bit different from your smartphone, but all the information is there. It's just formatted to fit a mobile device. And then I wanted to show you a screenshot, a little better screenshot of a practice guide for families, and point out again how these are formatted in the same way. Again, you'll see the teaming and collaboration is addressed. This is one practice guide out of 3 that addresses that topic area. This one is called Participating on Your Child's Team. So, for example, the performance checklist was titled, families are full team members. So that checklist addressed how to ensure that you help families to support families in being full team members. And so this one is voiced to the family specifically. We have the introduction that provides a description of what is the practice, what does it look like. We have the video examples that show it being used. We have more of those indicators defined and described in more detail. And then we have that vignette, again, for a family to see kind of what that would look like as a participant on their child's team. And then those outcomes that support a family in knowing they've been successful in this practice. Some of the things I wanted to point out about the practice guides for families is that they are intended for practitioners to share with families within the context of a conversation, ideally. We recognize that sometimes these are shared through newsletters and emails and so forth, but we really encourage folks to use these in a contextual format through conversations. And the way that might look for a parent center staff, you may have a family contact you with a question. For example, it may be a parent calling and saying, I'm going to have my first IFSP team meeting, and I really don't know what that is. What does that look like? How do I prepare for that? What are the expectations for me? So for example, this would be a great practice guide to share with that family. And I'm looking at the chat. And so this is just another example of how to do that. So it may be that you have a 3 to 5 minute conversation with that family on the phone, and then offer to send them this practice guide as a follow-up to really kind of give them some language. The practice guides were developed for families, are written using family-friendly language. That's one of the reasons why they've been so popular by practitioners, is that, a practitioner can look at this resource and kind of get that family-friendly language down pat because we've taken the jargon out. We've also addressed any kind of terminology that is necessary for a family to understand, but we've defined it. So we will include terminology, but we also provide some description and definition for that terminology. So folks like that. We've kind of taken that work out of the picture for practitioners. So they really appreciate this resource for that reason. And then here's a reminder of that the practice guides for families have been translated in Spanish. So that's another way that we've increased the accessibility for families. So now Stephanie is going to walk us through an illustration of kind of how this all ties together with the recommended practices. And I did want to stop and say, webinar 3, we're going to dig even deeper into these resources and how parent centers can begin using these.
Thanks, Allison. And yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, we will definitely in webinar 3 spend some more time with some scenarios and some examples of ways that families are using the resources, but also ways that parent centers can use the resources in their work with families. But I think we do have a question in the chat that I hope we'll kind of answer as we go through the next few slides, and if not, we'll come back to it. So, so kind of what does this all look like, and how do we kind of help begin to tie it all together for you? We've seen a number of different tools today. You've seen practice guides for families and practitioners. You've seen the performance checklists, and so kind of really, again, trying to help you see how they all fit together and can be useful to you in your work. What you're looking at on the screen now is a checklist that focuses, again, on informed family decision-making practices. And if you'll see the purple arrow pointing towards the bottom, just a reminder that the checklist, each of the checklists at the bottom tells you which of the recommended practices it's based on. So in this case, it's based on family practices 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. But for now, and just for our example today, and kind of in the interest of what we want to do, what we want to cover today, we're going to just focus on how this checklist addresses recommended practice F2. So if you'll remember from webinar 1, if you joined us, when we talk about F2, we're talking about family. That's the F, and 2 is the second practice within the family topic area. And as you can see on your screen, F2 says practitioners provide families with up-to-date, comprehensive, and unbiased information in a way that they can understand and use to make informed choices and decisions. So again, what does that mean? I mean, we want to make sure that families have the information they need. They have it in a way that's current, and in the case of the recommended practices, we know that this information and the practices are based on research, so we're giving families information about what they can expect and how that should look, and then they can make informed choices and decisions. They know they can take the information they've got and use that to advocate for their children. So in this informed family decision-making checklist, we can see that F2 is actually addressed in number 6. Indicator number 6, which says, remember, if we're thinking about a practitioner's looking at this, and a practitioner's saying, okay, I'm supposed to provide parents information about additional supports and resources they might consider to achieve identified goals and outcomes. So this really tells me, if I'm a parent, or I'm a parent center working with a parent, these items 1 through 7 here say this is what parents can and should expect from their team members. This is what parents should expect that their team members are going to provide to them, and how they're going to engage with them and work with them as a team. And I think this should be a really nice tool for parent centers as well, as you're helping families know what to prepare for and how to prepare for being part of a team, what they should expect and what they can ask for. Very clearly here, we can use these items on this checklist to say, you as a family member can go back and ask for additional supports and resources that can help you, that you might want to consider, that can help you achieve your child's or family's goals and outcomes. And as you'll remember, the practice guides then take that checklist indicator. So they take that same thing we just looked at and they expand on them. So in this example, this practice guide, which is for this is the practitioner one, takes it a little further, digs a little deeper, and continues to outline what that needs to look like. So in this example, the arrows, one of the items the arrow is pointing at says practitioners provide families, again, with up-to-date, comprehensive, and unbiased information. It's jargon-free, it's clear, it's understandable, it gives them information about the purposes of the interaction. So if it's an evaluation, what's the purpose of that interaction? If it's an IEP meeting or an IFSC meeting, what's the purpose? What can they expect? And how do we explain that to them in ways that are jargon-free so that they can fully participate and be involved in informed decision-making? And then it goes, again, the piece that I find most helpful and that I like the most about throughout this suite of tools is really the family practice guide. Because again, if you remember the way it's laid out, it's got that description and that video illustration. It talks about what the family should expect, gives you that family story, and really gives you all of the pieces there, including how to know when it's working. So again, related to what we've just been talking about as far as providing unbiased information, you see how it's worded if you can see it, and if not, obviously look to the left. It very much it's speaking to the family. You should expect to receive complete and unbiased information from professionals. You will want to consider different options and the possible outcomes of the choices that you make for you and your child and your family. and professionals who are working with families in a family-centered manner can help you decide which choices make the most sense for your family. So you can see, as Allison and Evelyn talked about, it being really written in family-friendly language, that the language shifts a little when it gets to the family practice guide. So it really is talking to that parent, talking to that family. And finally, again, we really want to point out down at the bottom of each family practice guide, you know, a family will know the practice is working when they can look at those bullet points and say, yes, I can reflect on these things. I can say, you know, it's working when I feel like I've been provided information that I need to make good choices. I don't know it's working when I feel good about the supports and resources that I've chosen. And I'll know it's working when it feels like the practitioner's on my side, when it doesn't feel like an us versus them kind of thing. I think as parent-centered staff, you can really begin to think about using these indicators of what's working when you're supporting families. Help them know when to talk to their team members if this isn't what they're seeing. If they aren't seeing those things or they aren't feeling these things, then it's a good time to go back to your team and talk to your team members. Using this example, you know, you could work with a family to help them feel confident about talking to practitioners. How do you even broach that subject if you don't feel like you have the information that you need? So I feel like that's some really good ways that this could be used with individual families. As you can see on this slide, we've provided you with the link to the first webinar that we recorded previously, as well as a list of links to the various resources we highlighted on today's call, the various tools, checklists, and practice guides, including the ones in Spanish. A recording of today's webinar will also be at the same webinar link that you see here in just a few weeks. So I think that answered one of the questions in the chat box. We know we did go through a lot of information fairly quickly. We do want you to, just a reminder that we're going to, as we move into question and answers, when we post the recording, the Q&A portion won't be there. We would really, really encourage you to go back and revisit these recorded webinars, use them with your colleagues, use them with other staff within your organization. You could potentially use them with families if you had like a group of families together or something, just to introduce some of the materials and some of the content. But we really want you to reuse them and share them as often as you need them and as often as you feel like they're helpful.
Yeah.
All right, so what's next? Just want to remind you that you're going to get an email asking you to complete an evaluation from today's webinar. And again, we really do look at those results and it'll help us plan and think about the next webinar. And also for those of you who participated in webinar 1 and completed the survey, a big thank you. The next webinar is scheduled for August 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And like I said, we said a few times, we're going to really try to provide you with some very concrete examples and actual scenarios that can help you think about how to use these tools in your day-to-day work.
This is Allison. I was just going to add, I know people are busy, but if you have the chance to go to the website and look at some of those resources and just kind of scan through, it would probably help you feel ready for the next webinar. I mean, you don't have to, but it would definitely support the next webinar. And that way, if you have questions also, when you come back, that'd be great.
Yeah, and finally, we just want to thank everyone for your time and participation today. Really appreciate you all getting on the webinar with us. We've provided our contact information at the end of the PowerPoint, so you can contact any of us if you have questions or need more information. And as Betsy mentioned at the beginning, we will be posting the recording as well as the slides. So again, thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.